God didn't waste it. I mean, if we hadn't walked there, would we have learned the things that we learned? No, we would not have. And so he uses those things to teach us so when he starts to move again, that we're prepared for that movement.
Welcome to the Faith Forward Leadership Podcast, where we talk with leaders about how they cultivate a higher purpose in their companies today and perpetuate it beyond their tenure. I am delighted to be joined today by Joan Maxwell, the president and co-founder of Regulator Marine, based in North Carolina. Thank you so much for joining me today, Joan.
It's my pleasure to be here with you. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I remember the first time I met you in person, I think was last year at a conference. And I remember looking at you thinking, I know her from somewhere. Maybe we met before. Then I figured it out. You've been featured as a faith-driven entrepreneur, a standout member of C12, all for the ways you are integrating faith actively in your boating business. And I love the mission. I'll read it here. To build the best center console sport fishing boats while honoring God. And you name specifically the people, the processes, and the resources he's given. So I love that. I love that overt commitment to excellence, to integrity, to stewardship. And you see how that just kind of ripples through from the quality of the premium boats you sell to the way you're engaging the culture of your company. So I'm excited to dig in. And before we share about how the business is going today and how the Lord's grown it for these nearly 4 decades, I'd love for you to take us back to the 80s when you and your husband founded this business. What prompted you to start the business?
That's a great question. It's a fun question to look back and kind of think about that, Becca, because it has been almost 40 years ago, so it's a while. It started way back when Owen was a little kid. Owen is my husband, was a little kid, and his parents had a place down at Hilton Head. So they would go to Hilton Head for the summers, and he fell in love with boats. So he was on boats, he was working on boats, and he's that little kid that would show up at the marina. It's like, if you need somebody to wash the boat, whatever you need to do, I'm here to do it. So he was that kid. And so that followed him even in college. We were cleaning out the attic not long ago, and we found some of his college books where he was supposed to be taking notes, and in reality, he was drawing boats. So his love was long ago. And so when we met, we spent a lot of time on the water. And in fact, we would talk about what would we do if we started our own company, our own boat company. And so we talked about that. And one day we were out on the boat, and he said, we were talking about that. And he said, well, there's one thing we have to do before that. And I was like, what? And so he got down on one knee and he said, I'm only going to do this once. And so he asked me to marry him on the boat. So our love for boating goes along with our love for one another. So it started really in that time frame. And we were 28 and 30 years old when we started Regulator. So we got married in 85. We started Regulator in 1988, and you don't know what you don't know, but you think you know. And so we were going after it as hard as we could. So that was our beginning way back in 1988.
Wow. So share with us a little bit, what have the last nearly 40 years been like? It sounds like you climbed a lot of learning curves, but share with us how has God grown the business?
God has grown this business in so many ways. I mean, every business has KPIs or key metrics that they look at. And, we've been very, very blessed to see the growth of the company and the number of dealers. Regulator builds sport fishing boats from 23 to 41 feet. And so we use a distribution network through dealers across the country and some internationally. So we don't sell them directly from the factory here. Although we were always thrilled when we have one of our customers come through and we get an opportunity to share with them not only that how we build the boats, because we love having our folks on the floor be able to tell what they do because they're the experts in what they do. But when someone comes and visits the plant, we have an opportunity then to share our faith.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we look at how the business has grown, I started thinking about how we kind of got here. Paul talks about, not looking back and pushing forward. But there were also back in the Old Testament those Ebenezer stones where when they'd walk past a place, they would say, God showed up here. And so when I start to look back a little bit, it's like, wow, God showed here. And when I look at that, I look back to as early as the starting of the company when we were trying to figure out a name for the company. And we were thinking, it, if it were, what would it be? And our faith was important to us, but our faith was not what it is today. And so we were like, well, the name Mastercraft sounds pretty good. But, when we started to look at that, that was a name someone else had. So that wasn't gonna be that. I have a degree in history, so the regulators come from a degree in history. So that's a long story about the name of the regulators, but it's on the website. People can go look at that, or you can go look at that. But, looking back at that, so seeing that part of starting was important to us. And then way back in 2004, was introduced to a book called Beyond the Norm, and it was about Norm Miller, who was the president, then the chairman of Interstate Batteries,
Mm.
and realized that they were doing things with faith in their workplace. If you look at their website, it is out there. They're not hiding the faith in God. They're not hiding their faith under a bushel in any way, shape, or form. So in 2004, someone gave me the book. I read the book and I was like, oh, I want to find out more. So I contacted them. I talked to the corporate chaplains, and finally I was able to actually speak to Norm. So that's a pretty cool thing, right? So I'd forgotten that, and I started thinking back about that, and it was like, God shows up and prepares us sometimes before we're ready to walk in that place. He starts laying the groundwork for us
Mm.
even long before we know he's doing it. And so that's one example of that. And
Wow.
then in 2007, we decided everybody needed a mission statement. So we started creating a mission statement. That mission statement was like this long. Who could remember it? No one. I'm not even sure I could read it off properly, but no one could remember it. And so, but we had it. And one part of that was to glorify God in that.
Mm.
And then in 2012, we had a new operations leader, and he came in and he talked to us about bringing in corporate chaplains. So corporate chaplains came, and we had corporate chaplains in here, and so beginning to change. And we said we want to be intentional about our faith. And one of our guys that works here had bought a truck. He bought the truck up in Pennsylvania. And he got the truck, and it had a Bible in the glove box of the truck. And he said, "Could we put Bibles in our owner's kits?" It's like, why not? Yes, let's do it. And so we started putting those Bibles in the owner's kits. And then in 2014, somebody invited me to a C12 introductory meeting. They were trying to move C12 into northeastern North Carolina. And I was like, okay. And so I went, and I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder coming back. So like, I need this, and, it's like, I don't need to do this. And then I'm driving along, and as the Holy Spirit does, he comes alongside and says, that's not right. You do need
Mhm.
this. So I got on the phone with Steve Calhoun and said, I want to apologize. I need to be here. And so I went to a meeting to see if I really did want to be there, and the rest is history for us. We have now four key players in C12, and the things that we have learned have been amazing on how to not only run the business as a business, but how to run the business God's way.
Wow. I love what you've shared there because several of the ideas and the practical ways you're applying faith at Regulator right now were not your ideas. They were actually from other leaders
That's right.
in the
That's right.
company. But I would just highlight and underscore, especially for the listeners, like you clearly had created a culture where those ideas were welcome, where leaders felt comfortable naming those things, which is not to be understated. But I love that it wasn't just you pushing it, because I think a lot of leaders feel it's them pushing something and they're not sure what to do, but you created a culture and brought people into that culture that were helping you steward and build that faith and faith integrated in the workplace in an appropriate way, in a way that's a blessing to those in your organization.
So, like, if you walk through here today, when we have our morning board meetings or all across the plant, there are these boards around that are, have the KPIs on them. They have everything on there. But the main thing that they have on them is the prayer request form. So each morning at those boards, we start with our core values. So the first one is the mission and vision. So that's Monday. And second thing to us after who we do what we do and how we do it and for whom we do it in our community to raise them up as well as to teach them about Jesus is we start with safety because that comes right behind that. And then Wednesday, it's integrity. So integrity is doing what is right before God regardless of the consequences. So when we define it that way, it we make different kinds of decisions here. And sometimes that means that something's out of warranty and there's, okay, well, is this the right thing to honor this? Well, we honor it. So whatever it might be, it's through that lens of we're going to make this decision the right way.
That's amazing. I would love to hear, you shared very practical ways that faith is playing out in the workplace, but you mentioned a comment earlier about how your faith and your husband's faith was different back then when you founded than it is today. Share with us that personal journey that was paralleling this, the company growing and learning how to build a culture that honors God.
Well, I grew up in the church. My dad was an elder in the church. I grew up in the Church of Christ. My dad was an elder in the church. My mother played the piano and taught Sunday school. So if the door was open, you can bet we were there. So I came to know the Lord early in life as like a 12-year-old. So I don't really know that I claimed my faith then. I was much older along the way. A day happened here in 2013 when the corporate chaplain held we would do lunches and he would do a little talk. And one of the things he talked about was the day that he came to know the Lord. And he knew that exact day. And I thought, I don't really know that I know that day. So today I'm claiming that this is my day. And so I did. And, there's the old hymn, now I belong to Jesus, Jesus belongs to me. So I started that was coming inside of me. And so it's like, okay, this is that day. So this was in 2013. And so this was, again, this is part of this journey of coming along, of God bringing us along and being patient with us as we grow. And Owen also grew up in the church. We grew when we were married. We went to church at the Episcopal Church, which is a very liturgical church. We have wonderful friends there. We had wonderful priests when we were first married there that were really wonderful, godly guys that really helped us along the journey. But it was really in the last 4 to 5 years during that time of COVID where things were closed and where do you go? And so we ended up going out to a non-denominational church. And our church has been on something called One Single Story. And so many times we read the Old Testament as the Old Testament and the New Testament as the New Testament. Or it's just this book of 66 little books piled in there together. But one single story is that story that God from the very beginning said, I love you. I want you to love me. I'm going to, as one of our guys here says, I'm going to send my son on the greatest rescue mission ever held in the world. And I'm going to send my kid to redeem you. And so in this time period, both of us have grown, but it's primarily been Owen growing during this time period. And I'm so excited for him and he watches the podcast every morning from our minister and I love it. I love it that he's growing in the rate that he's growing. I'd say at this point in his walk, he's probably growing faster than I am. So it's wonderful. And Owen has retired. He's no longer in the business day in, day out. So he's loving life right now. He's over on the tractor mowing. He's loving life right now. So
That's wonderful. I love hearing how you both grew kind of individually in your faith, together in your faith through marriage, and then applying your faith in the business you built together. And now he's retired from it and lets you keep running things. But that's amazing how God has worked through that relationship now to affect so many others. And for a rough estimate, how many employees does Regulator have?
We have 220 employees, and so we have here 3 shifts. Primarily, most of those people are on the first shift. So we have a second shift in the afternoon, and then later where we're shooting gel coat. If you think about when you look at a boat, the first thing you see is the first part of the process. So it starts in the mold late at night. So that shift comes in. It does the work then.
You've shared a lot about those intentional practices that you have, and you've been doing this for a while. Are there any God stories that you have from us, or just fruit that you've seen? You've even shared fruit in your own life from God speaking to you through the chaplains that you have. But there are other stories of just that ripple effect of that intentionality.
The intentionality, really, we sometimes we have to make leadership changes, and they're hard. They're hard to make, and we had to make one last July. And when we had to make that decision, it impacted production tremendously. We 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 were not honoring our commitments to people, and so we had to bring in a leader from another part of the company to run the operations. And it was not a fun time for anybody to be here. There was one day in that whole time period where there was a complete surrender. So this leader started holding devotions in the mornings. And he said, I had grown men taking off their hats, crying and saying, without you, we're not going to make it here, Lord. We're not going to be able to figure this out and be able to do this. And so we're going to have that mural painted and put on the wall, because that was a day in which it was complete surrender. It's when we can no longer say, I did it, but God, only you did it. And so that is going to be painted and put on a wall. So when we walk by it, that's our Ebenezer stone on that. We have another gentleman here who is an engineer, and engineers tend to have the facts, ma'am. And so this guy and his wife now are facing a cancer diagnosis and treatment that's going on. But his surrender and his wife's surrender to God, you have this. And he hasn't always had that walk. And so God wastes nothing. And he's showing up. He's showing up in this couple's life, that he is the one who is in charge, and that we are his from beginning to end. We are his. And so we're watching that growth within him. And so these are things that when we look at them and say, where are those God moments? Those God moments are all around us every day. Some we see and take note of, and some happen and we think it was just a day. And the reality is it's never just a day. It's God at work all around us.
Amen. I love that God wastes nothing.
Light waste nothing.
He uses all of it. It's interesting in some of the other interviews the theme has come out as like, what is God teaching you in the valleys, and how much learning happens there. That's so good. That's such good wisdom.
And it is great learning. And last year, my word for the year was endurance. And endurance, when we're in the valley, God is never absent. He's there, but he's saying, come on. When Jesus converted the 5 loaves and 2 fish, the disciples had to do something. I mean, he looked at them and, what are you going to do? And they said, well, this is all we have. He said, okay, bring it over, right? Come on, let's go. So there was work to be done on their part, and there's work to be done on our part. And that work often is not easy work. And it's, okay, what are we going to do right now? And sometimes that endurance is just, I'm just going to come in here one more day, one more day. And that's God showing up and saying, you do your part, but I've got the majority of it. You just show up and I'll do the rest. So he's a good God. He's a good God.
And now you're 40 years in. I love that you're gonna have this mural, that moment of surrender, because I think we all have that. Goodness, I know I've been feeling that lately. Like, how do we just lay it all before God? And you're making that Ebenezer around it. I love that legacy that you're building. You're clearly building
Really
this legacy, and just really, I just hear from you just being a channel for God to flow through Regulator, through your leadership team, to serve and to engage in however God's calling them. That's really this concept of abiding that we love to talk about, because it's not a cookie cutter solution that everyone can do. It's this process of being open to God. Share with us about, what does abiding look like for you individually, for the organization corporately? What does that look like?
abiding to me is being in the presence of God. So abiding in and it's abiding at church, it's abiding at home in devotion, it's abiding with Owen, it's abiding here in this place of really just being present with and being faithful to. And that's abiding to me. And so here, we do a lot of things. Our really one of our cool things is that we're working on is just simply meeting our people where they are. With 220 people, there's a lot of living and dying that goes on here. And so it's how do we help them to see God walking with them through these stages of life. Right now, we're running a journey through grief program. And so people can come in. And what's really, I don't go to these. The leader cannot be in the midst of that and hope people are going to be open and honest about it. You just kind of get out of the way and let other people do the work and let God show up in that place. So we've got some people that have been doing a little bumping of the head. And then when they got in the grief journey, but the HR leaders in that. And you met Crystal Watson. And so she said, they now have empathy for one another. Seeing that this walk of grief is at times lonely. So now we're working on another program of how to be a good dad. So the next part of how is the single mother. So we've done financial planning with people and all those types of things. So walking alongside is different in different stages of life for everybody. So our goal is to walk alongside, and as we walk alongside, we get to share Jesus more and more. And we have a corporate chaplain today. We're no longer with corporate chaplains of America's who we were for many years because we we needed more.
Mm.
And so we have a chaplain that is in the house 2 days a week, and, so people come in, they can sit down, talk to him anytime they want. He walks the floors talking to them, and then they come and they see him, and they share things that they want. We have a program here called Recovery Through Grace. So when people have had a problem with drugs and, we have a random drug test, and they show up on that, is one of their requirements is the counselor, the chaplain's also a counselor. So
Mhm.
one of their requirements is that they have to meet with the counselor once a week. So in that process, it's helping them to look at life a different way. And when they finish their program, they get a coin. And some of
Mhm.
them really they wanna keep come back and keep coming every week, and you said, "You can come. You don't have to be in the Recovery Through Grace program. You can come." So it's meeting people where they are.
Mhm. I love that. And it sounds like, if I can infer, there's very much, it seems to be like a listening posture, because you have to get feedback to know this isn't a program that Joan or Crystal thinks are a good idea. Let's do this. It's really from knowing your people. What advice, or share about your approach to just being a good listener to your team?
It's getting to know people. I mean, it was walking around and listening to what the leaders are saying or, you know, having personally experienced something that you go, man, I struggled through that. I bet somebody else might be struggling through the same thing. And how do you help people to walk through that? That Crystal and Tony back. Tony is our in his service coordinator back there. I say back there because they're another part of the plant, but they hear more things than I hear, and they're gonna see where the need is. And so, okay, let's figure it out and let's start walking alongside. And so they do a nice job with that. We have a group here called In His Service. So they're made up of people from all over the plant, and there are about 10 of them on the committee. And this was something we learned about through C12. C12 has been amazing. The things we've learned. It's not a commercial, but it could be for them. But I love Mike Scherer. So Mike, if you watch, hey, I love you. But so when we were looking at how do we were looking at more from a financial standpoint of being able, how do you help people without hurting people? Because if you give them a contribution. They have a need, you give them something. We don't loan money. Loaning, the Bible is not really, the Bible is very clear not to be a loan of money or. So we try not to do that. And so we were like, how do you help somebody? So if you're going to do it, it's a gift. So how do you do that with parameters around that gift and not make it a taxable consequence? Because if we do it from this company, it becomes then a taxable consequence to them. So, okay, how do we do this? So we were able to figure out a way to be able to have people to present their need. And Tony, as the coordinator, is the person who sees who it is, and she finds out more about why it's an emergency. So some things are not really emergencies. And so finding out why it's an emergency, and then she brings it to the committee and just presents it as a case, and then they decide whether I give them a budget and whether or not they want to fund it or not. So it's a great program. And people, you really realize when you see some of the things that come in, the struggles of life. Again, the struggles of life and how to walk through that.
Well, it sounds like this amazing legacy that you guys have built up again over time. People listening who are kind of newer in their leadership journey or have started younger organizations. I love hearing how this over time it evolved. Many people spoke into it. I'd love to hear from you. Share about the season of leadership you're in now and thinking about the legacy and forward looking direction of the company.
So we are in that legacy side of it. Owen back probably I think 7 years ago hired a new VP of engineering because he was planning his way out. So he did a really good job planning his way out. Everything else had been from reporting to me for years, manufacturing, all the other parts of the business except engineering. And so he did a really good job of selecting someone. And you met David when we were in DC when we met you there. David is a wonderful, wonderful guy who really has a heart for the Lord and is an amazing engineer. So the legacy preparing for that is understanding that the products that we build are really the avenue that allows us to have access to people and to do things. So it's really our platform. It's our platform that we use. So David often jokes that that Paul built tents and that we build boats here. So it's our way of getting in. So part of that legacy is making sure that the product remains the same. So the other part of when we build legacy is that we want to make sure that what we do is sustainable for many, many years to come. And that's making sure that people know Jesus in this, that as a result of this place and this work done here, that people know Jesus. If they already know him, we want them to learn more and to grow in that. And we want to be very, very good stewards of what the Lord has blessed us with to be able to further the work of the people who are on the front lines in many countries of the world, and even in our small little community here outside of these walls. So
Mm,
our legacy, I hope our legacy is that they love Jesus and they want others to love Jesus.
amen. Well, I always like to ask about mission drift because I think mission drift is something that a lot of leaders don't talk about because, especially founders, it's so clear what drift would look like to you. And
Yeah.
yet, you know, down the line or through the game of telephone, sometimes things get muddled or eroded or things like that. So I love, especially when I'm talking to the founders, say, when you think about now, and again, you've maybe didn't know this at the day one from starting, but now 40 years in to founding and leading this organization, what do you think mission drift would look like for Regulator Marine?
That's a great question, and I think what mission drift would look like for us, it's some of it would be very obvious. Well, we talked about the team boards here. So the first thing that you would become very obvious is that those team board meetings would not include the the prayer and praise time. That would be very, very first thing. Looking at the core values and reciting those core values on a daily basis, each day being a different. I mean, those would be very, very obvious things that had suddenly slipped away or slowly slipped away. Instead of taking 10% and using that money to expand Regulator while investing in a bright future for our team and our community, which is what our vision is, obviously that is many things ministry related as well as other things, but that would go away because that would go right to the bottom line. People just go, okay, why are we spending the money on this? There would be no chaplains in the house. So these would become very obvious signs that there had been drift away from the values of the company. KPIs would begin to show those things and the focus away from quality and the focus away from efficiencies. That would begin to show. Things that would not quite be as obvious would be the brand itself, the value of the brand. So if you look back over many years and you think of products that had stellar brands and they're no longer here, that drifted away very slowly. It wasn't because somebody stood up one day and said, we aren't going to make this again. It was a slow drift away. So that's what I think that mission drift would look like here.
Mm-hmm. And
I
I love,
wanted
I mean, it's kind of just the way you articulate it, even it kind of is just this ripple from the brand and the quality of the product to the team to the culture to the giving and the generosity and the philanthropic side of what is true of Regulator.
that would just go away. And we don't want that to go away. We don't want
Right.
that to go away at all. So what the future looks like, I'm not really sure at this point. I used to be very say no, we aren't going to sell it. We're not going to sell it. I think some of that may have been arrogance and pride. And so maybe that was also God using a stubbornness to say, you're responsible. This is a small community, so you're responsible for what I give you to steward in this community. So is that my arrogance and pride, or is it God working in me? I hope it's the latter and not my arrogance and pride. So we want to make sure that the business continues here in a way that benefits the community and brings honor and glory to Jesus every single day.
Amen. It's another big issue to be abiding on in terms of the ownership. But it sounds like you've done a lot of thoughtful planning on the succession side of things, which is really positive to see.
I've done some work on that one last fall. When we talk about abiding, I needed to get away and to do some thinking. And I'm a doer. So stopping to think is very hard is work. It is work for me. And my C12 group encouraged me to go away for like 4 days. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'll be happy if I can make one day out of this deal. So, one guy offered me his house down on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It's a 7-bedroom house, one person. And so he offers it to me, and there's a nor'easter blowing, which blocks the road to the north, and the ferries were not running to the south. So I was going nowhere. So I planned to be there for 4 days, and it was like it's going to be a quiet retreat. And it was a quiet retreat, and it was amazing what God can do when we are really silent. And for 4 days, I had not turned on TV. I sent probably 4 texts just because I needed to say I'm alive to Owen, and 1 or 2 other things that came up that I needed to respond to. Other than that, I wasn't on any devices or anything. And I realized I stopped at a welcome center on my way back, driving back home, and realized I had not heard any music, anything for 4 days. And it was like, wow, that's pretty nice. But it was in that time of really listening. What does God say? And reading and giving myself permission to rest. And sometimes we have to give ourselves permission to rest so we can hear God. So it was interesting. That was a different abiding for me back. It was very different.
I love that. I think it just shows that even as you grow in your relationship with God, you can learn new ways to connect with him. And I'm kind of with you in that doer camp. I think that would be like it sounds amazing, but the practical how could I actually be silent for 4 days? I love that you stepped in and leaned into that and the weather was conducive for you being alone for those 4 days. Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. It really was. And I read some things, and I would read, and I wouldn't really go to sleep. I would just lie down on the sofa, and it was rest. It was rest. And for God to reveal to me he will not do things the way he has done them. And I can't expect the next leader to put on my armor. He will put on the armor that God gives him or her to sit in the seat. When we look at Saul and David, when we look at that example, Saul's trying to like, here, put on the armor, go out and, you're going to face the Goliath here. Let me protect you and give you this armor. And it's like, no. So the armor for one leader does not fit necessarily the armor for the next leader. And so that's what God was trying to teach me is it's not going to look the same. And so as a founder and a leader, we often expect things to look the same, and they're not. And so if we can get our head wrapped around that piece of that beforehand, I think that it makes the transition. Ask me in a few years how'd that transition work out. But I think it probably works pretty well.
Well, I hear such humility in that, and even just back to that word surrender, just kind of a surrendered posture that God gave you the business and you're working hard, but God allowed the business to grow and bless the fruit of your labor, and He will see it through to the next generation.
He will. He will. I'm confident of that.
Well, as we wrap up today, I would love to hear from you. What would be advice you would give to a younger version of yourself, a younger leader, entrepreneur that seeks to really to integrate faith in the work, to work with excellence? What would be some advice you would give?
That's an interesting question. So I would say be inquisitive. I would say look around, learn internally, learn more about what's going on in the business on all levels of it, understand all levels of it, and then look out. So who's doing something well? Go find them. Go find the Norm Miller and ask questions, Go out there and do that. I would say don't think you can do it all yourself. Realize that God tells us that we need many advisors, right, for these plans to succeed. And so I think I would tell myself ask for help sooner than I've done. There were two wonderful leaders that I encountered early on, and that I'm sad one has died and one is aging. Rex was 65 when he came to work at Regulator and stayed here almost until 80, helping us in the HR side of things, and just so much wisdom, and so godly a man, and so much wisdom. And then Don Jones, who was amazing leader in process and really helped. How do you motivate people to follow processes and do the things that help businesses to be successful? And I would also tell them that you think that all people have to be Christians for God to use them. And the answer to that question is no, that God uses the ungodly to do his work when it is in his will. And having encountered someone early on that whose great wisdom helped us as we went through the Great Recession and
Mm,
navigating what that meant from a financial standpoint. Because, yeah, I have a degree in history and Owen has a degree in agronomy. While as Christians, we want to surround ourselves with people who are Christians. Sometimes God will use someone else and to just be listening and watching. I would say, if anything, to myself back then, I would say, stop talking and start listening. That there's a lot more going on around and God at work if I would just have stopped and listened. So I would say do those things.
yeah, that's so good. And just a bonus question for you since you mentioned it. Share a little bit with us how the business was impacted by the Great Recession and what you learned through that and how God brought you all through that.
That was a very, very, very hard time, and I think, when you face something like that, you face a lot of things of whether or not the business will even survive, and it was very close to not surviving. And a funny story. So we were going to see our accountant, and if if it is if a business is considered not a going concern, meaning it can't go forward, when the taxes are done, it has to be reported as that. And so our accountant was doing that, and he looked at us and he said, it's really looking like I'm going to have to report this. And he said, I had a heart attack, we were like, you had a heart attack? And he said, yes, I had a heart attack. We're so sorry you had the heart attack. And he said, it's put my business behind and I can file a extension on your taxes. And he filed the extension. And in that time period, we were able to do some things within that time period that the business was able to continue to go. God shows up with this guy that we know. We fish with him, great guy. Wonderful, wonderful. If you were to meet him, he's the most moral person that you would meet, but doesn't profess to know Jesus. But God shows up with them to help us to navigate through when the bank was looking at foreclosure here. And so, you know, we see most of the time we see God at work in the hindsight. And so this was seeing him at work during that time period. The same gentleman I was telling you about, he we had been several years through. When we entered the recession, we were debt free, and the bank had no personal guarantees. It had no collateral on the building, so it was not in a position to negotiate at that point. So through the period of a couple of years, it ended up that we said, okay, we'll give you the building for collateral. We never gave the personal guarantee. So we had gotten to the point that the loan was down at a reasonable amount. We were going to be able to work our way out of it. Literally, we were in the workout group, and so we were going to be able to work out of it. And but they wanted to shorten the term from like a year to like 6 months. And so this gentleman said, "There's no way, you can't do this. This is set up to not do it." So he wakes up 4 o'clock in the morning. He writes a letter, and it basically says, "We've done all we can do. We have taken care of the business. We've run it the best we can, and this is it. If you'll send it, tell us where you want to send the keys. We'll call it done." And so he wrote the letter out. So by 8 o'clock, I come in here, or whatever time it was, I came in here, 7, 8 o'clock. I printed it out, and when I looked at it and said, "This is exactly how we feel," I signed it as the president and I set it on. So he goes back to bed. So about 10 o'clock, he calls and he said, "Did you get the letter?" We said, "We sure did." And we thought it was absolutely perfect. And this is exactly how we feel. So we sent it on. He said, "You sent it on?" We said, "We certainly did." And so it stopped all that process. And so we were able to, continue on, just pay down the loan and get out from under that institution. But see how God works things out? I
Yeah.
mean, God had a bigger plan than what 2008 and 9 was going to bring. He brought in the people that were needed. He knew we were not capable of doing that. So he provided people. There was a leader here that was able to work through the process of how do you reduce inventories and do all the things that we had to do. So God provides. Always he provides it.
Well, thank you for sharing that example with us because I think that illustrates so many things that what does it look like to work it out when it's really hard, when it is, life or death of the business kind of hard. It's easy, from the outside to look and be like, wow, this up and to the right story and faith is there. But there's a lot of hard things that any business leader, any nonprofit leader faces. And those existential crises, I think, are a way of solidifying what you believe, but also just seeing how God shows up in the good times, but in those valleys as well.
Yeah, and sometimes, we don't even know he's been there at the time, we just know, it's dark, and I remember telling Owen during that time, said, it feels like you're in a little rowboat in the middle of the fog and you feel like you're the only one there. And then as the fog starts to lift and that, you begin to see there are other little rowboats all around you. And so for us, we were seeing that there are other businesses that were going through the same things, but God didn't waste it. I mean, if we hadn't walked there, would we have learned the things that we learned? No, we would not have. And so he uses those things to teach us so when he starts to move again, that we're prepared for that movement. So if you don't understand the ramifications of all financial decisions, and I knew I didn't want the personal guarantees on. I knew that was important. So thank God we'd gotten those off. But there were other things I didn't know. And so doesn't mean I know them now, but I know who to call. I mean, I know when we hired a VP of finance a few years later to make sure that person knew. So, that's again God equipping us as we are able and ready to do the next job. So, I mean, why give us some knowledge that we can't use? Again, he's very practical. So,
So good. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this. Thank you for living out your faith, even when it's not easy to do, and for bringing other leaders in to live out their faith as well. And I love how you've just seen God at work through your organization. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciated it.
thank you, Becca. It's our pleasure. And we invite you to come down here and just meet these nice people. And God has sent us a whole house full of good people. So come on in.
Wonderful. I would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope this was helpful in your leadership journey. On behalf of On Mission Advisors, if there's anything we can do to help you better define, protect, and champion what matters most in your company, please reach out and contact us. We'd be happy to help you as well. Until next time.